Hello, and welcome to the Project Management Institute's Risk Management Professional Certification Preparatory course offered by Simplilearn. In this lesson, we will find out how to perform qualitative risk analysis. Let us look into the objectives of this lesson in the next screen. After completing this lesson, you will be able to define the purposes and objectives, identify critical success factors, explain inputs, tools and techniques along with their characteristics, and outputs. Describe how to document the results. In the next screen, let us begin with the purposes and objectives of the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process. It is practically impossible to deal with all the risks of the project at the same time with the same intensity. Therefore, prioritizing the risks of the project is important. Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process enables the project manager and the team to prioritize the risks of the project by assigning a probability and impact number and arriving at the risk exposures of the risks. The risks are prioritized based on risk exposures. Therefore, the purposes and objectives of qualitative risk analysis are to assess and evaluate characteristics of individually identified risks. It also includes prioritizing the risks based on the agreed-upon characteristics. Assessing individual risk evaluates the probability that each risk will occur and the effect it can have on the project objectives. Categorizing risks according to their source or causes will help in filtering them out. Qualitative risk analysis is used to determine the risk exposure of the project by multiplying the probability and the impact. In the next screen, we will discuss the critical success factors, or CSFs, for Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process. In this screen, you will look at the fundamental approach, which is Use Agreed-Upon Approach. You need to apply an agreed-upon approach to all the identified risks in any project. All risks may be assessed according to the probability of occurrence and impact on individual objectives. Other factors to be considered here are urgency and manageability. Urgency, also known as proximity, implies that risks that require near-term responses may be considered more urgent to deal with. Indicators of urgency can include the lead time to execute a risk response and clarity of symptoms and warning signs or detectability. Here, lead time is advancing an activity. Manageability implies that some risks are not manageable, and if you try to address those, it may be a waste of time and resources. The project team may decide whether to go forward and perhaps establish a contingency reserve or to stop or rescope the project, as these risks may be unmanageable threat or an opportunity. Further, the project team may also involve customers and ask for their viewpoint. Also, you need to consider the other factor, which is called impact external to the project. It means that the importance of a risk may be increased if it affects the enterprise beyond the project. In the next screen, we will look into the next critical success factor, that is, use agreed-upon definitions of risk terms. Risk assessment should be based on agreed-upon definitions of important terms and should be used consistently. For example, levels of probability, 25%, and impact on objectives, cost, minus $10,000. The use of definitions assists the providers of the information in giving realistic assessments for each risk. Communication will be better for the management and the stakeholders. In the next screen, we will discuss the next critical success factor, which is collecting high-quality information about risks. For any risk analysis, quality of data is very important. You can gather the quality data from interviews, workshops, and using expert judgment techniques. Data may be unbiased or intentionally biased. Biased data should be remedied. The remedy or the corrective action comes with experience and communication with the stakeholders. In the next screen, we will discuss the last critical success factor, which is performing iterative qualitative risk analysis. Qualitative risk analysis is not complete with one analysis. It is done throughout the phases of a project's life cycle. This ensures accurate analysis of risks in accordance with the changes happening in the project. The frequency of this effort will be planned in the plan risk management process, but it may also depend on events occurring within the project. In this screen, we will list out the inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs of Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process. The inputs are Risk Register, Risk Management Plan, Scope Baseline, Enterprise Environmental Factors, and Organizational Process Assets. The tools and techniques are Risk Probability and Impact Assessment, Probability and Impact Matrix, Risk Data Quality Assessment, Risk Categorization, Risk Urgency Assessment, and Expert Judgment. The output is Project Documents Updates. These inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs are discussed in detail in the next few screens. We will now move on to the inputs required to perform qualitative risk analysis in the next screen. Following are the inputs required to perform qualitative risk analysis. You need the risk register because the identified risks are documented in the risk register. The risk management plan is needed because the probability scales and impact scales are defined in the plan. It contains important information on roles and assignments in risk management, risk categories, the probability and impact matrix, scheduled activities for risk management, and revised stakeholders' risk tolerances. The main output of plan risk management is Risk Management Plan, and the output of identifying the risk process is Risk Register. The project manager might want to look into the Scope Baseline. This is because it gives an idea of the uncertainties of the project when it uses a technology which is new to the organization. Enterprise environmental factors provide insight and context to risk assessment, like industry studies of similar projects by risk specialists, risk databases available for the industry, or proprietary sources. Finally, organizational process assets that can influence the qualitative risk analysis process include information on prior completed projects of similar scope. Essentially, this is historical data. In the next screen, we will discuss the tools and techniques used for qualitative risk analysis. In this screen, we'll discuss the characteristics of tools and techniques for the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process. You should be aware of the risk characteristics such as description, the identified date, customer details, etc., so that the importance of the risk can be defined. In general, the tools and techniques used for qualitative risk analysis include risk probability and impact assessment, and probability and impact matrix. To do this, you need to collect and analyze data by using risk quality assessment and expert judgment. It is important to prioritize risks by probability and impact on specific objectives and overall project. For example, risk urgency assessment. Further, you can categorize risk causes, risk categorization, and document the results of the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process. The risk team would assign a probability and impact value to the risk. Risk is a factor of probability and impact, which would give the risk exposure. Risk exposure is mapped to the probability and impact matrix to categorize the risk as high, medium, or low. It is important for a project manager to make sure that the data obtained of the risk is unbiased, accurate, and of high quality. Also, as a part of qualitative risk analysis, it is important to identify the urgency of the risk. Urgency is determined on the basis of the amount of risk response time available. To arrive at this urgency value, you should assess the probability and impact of a specific or individual risk, as well as the impact it can have on the overall project objectives. Project objective can be schedule or cost. This urgency will help in prioritizing the risk. Finally, it is important that the project manager involves experts during the process of analyzing risks and documents the risks for further analysis if required. Let us discuss an example of risk probability and impact assessment in the next screen. During the qualitative risk analysis, Stephen, a risk SME, is concerned with the probability and impact scores that the project team determined for a project he is assigned to. The team had previously agreed that the majority would determine the probability and impact. This is to remove group thinking and bias in any area during early risk analysis. After the first round of analysis, and after reviewing the results, Stephen is concerned about the validity of the team's conclusions. Reluctant to sign off on results he does not believe are accurate, he decided to assess the data quality of the available information that was used to assign probability and impact to each risk. We will continue our discussion of this example in the following screen. During the assessment, Stephen decides that the data is not good enough to accurately draw conclusions about the majority of risks. After gathering additional information from industry sources, Stephen provides more accurate data to the team, who then conducts a probability and impact assessment again. Armed with better data, the qualities of the individual risks reflect a previously unforeseen category of risks that are now near-term and require immediate attentions. If Stephen had not sought a better quality of data to support the team's conclusions, they would not have identified the unforeseen risk category. The team then reacts appropriately by performing further analysis and assigning action plans for the risks in case they occur. Let us discuss root cause analysis in the next screen. A root cause analysis seeks to identify basic causes of risks that may be visible symptoms of more fundamental forces. It may identify common sources of several risks, leading to broad-reaching risk response strategies. You need to be careful when using this technique for risk identification to distinguish between risks, uncertain causes of the impact, and issues, certain causes of the impact. An example of root cause analysis is shown on the screen. In the diagram, you will be able to see the risks that were initially identified include rework, extra cost, schedule slips, low team morale, customer mistrust, and repeated audits. An examination of the identified risks leads to a common root cause that later phases of the project were typically started before the earlier ones were sufficiently mature. This organization frequently ignored the proper phase entry prerequisites, hastening later project to speed up the project. In the next screen, we will look at estimating techniques. A common estimating technique associated with risk management is the probability and impact assessment. This tool is used concurrently with a predefined probability and impact matrix. It must be used consistently throughout the project, with clearly defined definitions for probability and impact. The definitions for probability and impact for threats, as well as opportunities, have already been discussed, along with an example of how to develop PIM scores for each identified risk. In the next screen, we will focus on historical documentation. One invaluable source of information for a project is any available data on previous projects that were similar to the current one. There are many risks that will reoccur from one project to the next. To capitalize on lessons learned, you will need access, and it must be well structured. It is also beneficial to talk to previous project stakeholders who can fill in any gaps in the information. Speaking to the previous project manager would be ideal. Do not be surprised if you find incomplete details, as poor strategies are rarely documented. Examples of historical documentation includes previous risk plans, risk registers, contracts, project post-mortem documentation, change requests, cost and time estimates, etc. Let us discuss the analytical hierarchy process in the following screen. AHP is a tool used to determine the preferences for achieving the project objectives. All the constraints cannot be equally important. For example, you can use AHP to determine if cost is more important than scope, or if time is equally or less important than quality. Your preference for one constraint over another can determine the importance with one another using a scoring model. This scoring model can help justify where trade-offs are needed during the project. Specialized software is used for AHP. In the example on the screen, the steps of AHP are shown in detail. Let us look at the risk urgency assessment in the next screen. You must determine the urgency of each risk as you analyze them. Risk urgency appears in two forms. First, the risks which are near-term must be addressed immediately. This means your focus must be on whatever can impact the project and should be addressed now. The second type of urgency concerns the time required to plan for a risk. If it takes 18 months to develop a sound plan, then you may need to start immediately. In the following screen, we will discuss the steps of Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process. The steps involved in the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process are explained with the help of a flowchart on this screen. The first step of the Qualitative Risk Analysis process is to select risk characteristics which are of interest to the management. After this, you need to collect and analyze data, which leads to the prioritization of risks. In the next step, you can categorize the risks based on the causes and finally document the results of the analysis. In the next few screens, we will discuss each of these steps in detail. Let us begin with the first step, which is selecting risk characteristics. Qualitative risk analysis helps in prioritization of risks, which are important for response or further analysis. The criteria should be decided in advance. The tools help to specify levels and risk characteristics which are of management's interests. Most tools help to assess the risk importance from a combination of probability of occurrence and degree of impact on objectives. The output of using the tools of qualitative risk analysis includes a list of risks in priority order, or in priority groups like high, medium, and low. One of the tools is the probability and impact table. Once the risk characteristics are set, next step is to collect and analyze the data. Let us discuss this in the next screen. In this screen, we will focus on the assessment of individual risks. Assessment of risk is based on the information collected. Therefore, data collection and evaluation tools require management support and attention. It is necessary to be unbiased in data gathering, which is important when relying on expert judgment for information. In the next screen, we will look into the next step of qualitative risk analysis, which is prioritizing risks by probability and impact on specific objectives. Risks will have uneven impact and probability of occurrence on various project objectives. Therefore, they need to be prioritized by probability and impact on specific objectives so that the right action can be taken at the right time. These tools help in the prioritization of risks in terms of affected specific project objectives like time, cost, quality, etc. The next screen is about prioritization of risks from the point of view of probability and impact on the overall project. The reason to prioritize risks by probability and impact based on specific and overall project is to have better communication. It is also done to convey the right information to the right people based on their interests. When a single risk prioritization index is needed, the organization should be explicit about how that index is created. Usually, the index reflects the organization's preference among the objectives. The technique for determining the overall risk priority should be documented in the plan risk management process. In the next screen, we will discuss the categorization of risks based on causes. Categorization of risk leads to improved analysis of probability and magnitude of project risk, as well as effective responses. Some risks may be linked with others, and interpreting this chain of risks may lead to a better understanding of the implication of risk on the project. Identifying risks that can occur at the same time, or using the same resource for recovery, might provide a realistic picture of the problems of risk mitigation using limited resources. Combining the results of Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process with risk breakdown structure can show clusters of risk priorities arising from specific sources. A combination of risk analysis information with work breakdown structure, or WBS, can show which areas of the project exhibit more risk. Assessing high-priority risks, for example on schedule, may indicate the activities that you need to address to reduce that objective's uncertainty. Let us discuss the documentation of results of the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process in the next screen. Documentation is the last step carried out in case of the Qualitative Risk Analysis process. The results of the analysis are documented in the Risk Register, which is the output of the risk identification process. While documenting the results of Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process, the probability, impact, specific objective or overall project, and priority, specific objective or overall project, of risks are documented in the Risk Register. The Risk Register lists the prioritized risks, which are posted to stakeholders for further analysis or action. Risks of high priority are analyzed further and are frequently monitored. Risks of low priority are under watch list and are reviewed less often for changes in their status. Let us discuss an example of performing qualitative risk analysis process in the next screen. Samuel is a risk analyst for a new startup company that specializes in software products for a variety of industries. Samuel has recently begun qualitative analysis after identifying several hundred risks for a medium-sized project. While assigning a probability and impact score to each risk, Samuel begins to notice a trend by having many high scores in one particular area. After completing analysis, he ranks the risks accordingly from greatest to least and confirms his previous suspicion about a category of risks. His conclusion is that the majority of his risks are largely related to human resources and specifically focused on training. Let us continue discussing this example in the next screen. He checks the risk breakdown structure and updates it with this new subcategory. He also reviews the scope baseline to determine which work packages contain the greatest concentrations of human resource requirements in order to complete them. He then assesses the quality of these particular areas as having a high-risk quality to the project and prepares to quantify the impact to the overall project. By grouping risks together, Samuel was able to see the big picture and determine where high concentrations of risks might occur, as well as confirm these areas require quantitative analysis. In the next screen, we will discuss the output of this process, that is, project documents updates. The project document updates, which form the output of the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process, include Risk Register updates and Assumptions Log updates. Updates to the Risk Register include new information based on qualitative risk analysis of individual risks, like probability, impact, ranking, urgency, as well as categorization. It also includes a watch list for high priority and low priority risks, respectively. Assumptions log updates are required if there is any change in the assumptions due to analysis. This may be updated in project scope statement. The prioritization of risks and documentation in the risk register will lead to the next process, which is a quantitative risk analysis process. Let us move on to the quiz questions to check your understanding of the concepts covered in this lesson. Here is a quick recap of what was covered in this lesson. The critical success factors for Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis process are agreed upon approach, agreed upon definitions, high quality information, and iterative qualitative risk analysis. The inputs of this process are Risk Register, Risk Management Plan, Scope Baseline, Enterprise Environmental Factors, and Organizational Process Assets. The tools and techniques used in this process are Risk Probability and Impact Assessment, Probability and Impact Matrix, Risk Data Quality Assessment, Risk Categorization, Risk Urgency Assessment, and Expert Judgment. The output of this process is Project Documents Updates. This concludes the Perform Qualitative Risk Analysis.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.